Welcome to How to Make Films and Influence People.
Hey everybody, and welcome to How to Make Films and Influence People with Peter and Andrew, where we talk about our own approach to screenwriting and filmmaking, discuss great works of cinema, and blasphemously imagine how they could be remade. This week we'll be talking about 12 Angry Men, giving an update on our current screenplay project the audience has been contributing to. But first of all, I'm Peter, successful filmmaker, film professor, and screenwriter, and this is Andrew.
Screenwriter, filmmaker, but not a New York City judge by choice.
And this week, we don't have too much to report on the screenplay that we're working on. We keep going on that, but I'm actually going tomorrow evening to a film festival where I'm actually, a film of mine is going to be shown, and there I'll be doing a Q&A there. And I just thought it might be a nice chance to talk a little bit about experience with film festivals, going to them, participating in them. And you recently went to a screening at Sundance. Is that right, Andrew?
Right. Yep.
Would you recommend going to film festivals? Is it a good experience for you? What's been your experience like with that?
Yeah, I've been to a few, and I've been to Sundance multiple times. And I think one of the fun things is, besides the fact you're seeing this film first, or, one of the original first times see it, a lot of the times they do bring out the people who made the film or some of the people afterwards, and they do a Q&A and they talk about the process. And that's kind of fun to just see, you just watch the film, there they are right there in front of you, and then just answering questions directly about it. I think it's worth it to just have that experience of being so close to the whole process of when you usually watch a film in a theater or on TV, you just feel very far removed from how this came about, but to almost feel like you're part of the process. And I think the film festivals are a good way to do that. I know you've been to a lot of them though.
Yeah, I've been to a lot, and in different capacities. I've been to, I've only been, I think Sundance might be. Oh no, Sundance I've been to as just a viewer. I've also worked at Sundance, and then I've had a bunch of films play at a lot of festivals. I went to one also, like the French Embassy in Washington D.C. put on a little French film festival, which very different from Sundance, but that I think is something that people often don't take into account, and because of the festival that I'm going to tomorrow is not a big festival, but that is something that I think a lot of times people overlook. That definitely going to a big film festival, and some of the big ones, Sundance, Slamdance, New York, Austin, South by Southwest. So those are some of the big ones. Tribeca. Sometimes they're in major cities, sometimes they're in sort of out of the way places, but those can be really cool. I think for exactly what you're saying about, you get to see big films before the general public. You get to feel kind of cool. A lot of the people from the film might be there at the festival doing a Q&A, or just you sort of, seeing them walking down the street. That's been I know Sundance is moving, but that's been a nice thing in Park City, Utah, of just like seeing people on the sidewalk who are very famous, and that's kind of a cool thing. But what I think a lot of people don't think about is smaller film festivals, and I think that can be, you're not going to see the giant films there, you're not going to see the big celebrities there, but I think they can be fun cultural events. Maybe you're not seeing the best movies. I would recommend going to short film selections at smaller film festivals, because if you sit down for a 2-hour movie and it's the kind of movie that's only playing at a small film festival, it's probably not going to be great. But short films, they play all, first of all, if it's not great, there's going to be another one in 5 minutes. But second of all, short films it's just a different marketplace. And so it might be amazing films that you're seeing even at a tiny film festival in the middle of nowhere. So I think on a cultural level, that's kind of a fun experience. But it's also, I think, really valuable on a sort of networking level. I think Sundance and those giant film festivals aren't necessarily great for networking unless you have a big project ready to go. But if you go to a small regional film festival and you are a screenwriter, for instance, there are going to be a lot of filmmakers there who might be interested in connecting with you, and I've got a great script. Let's talk about what that could be. Maybe that could be something that you could direct. Or if you're a director, you're looking for people to collaborate with, to work with. I think that there's a lot of networking that can happen at smaller film festivals, because in my experience, having been to a lot, you show your film, maybe you have a quick Q&A after, and if you're the filmmaker, you're just standing around. If somebody wants to come and talk to you and strike up a conversation, usually people are all for it. And I think that that's something that a lot of people who are interested in getting into filmmaking underappreciate and maybe should look for.
And that's a great suggestion. The smaller film festivals that I've been to, a lot of them are student film festivals, but I still remember some of these short movies. You know, they're like 2 or 3 minutes. Some of them are just really creative, and you there's good things that can come out of even somebody who doesn't know that much about filmmaking. There's still like just the creativity behind it, and a lot of it is fun, even though there's some really bad ones. But every now and then you get like a gem, and you're like, wow, that was really cool. So, it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and I think like if you see like the feature length films that are only playing at small festivals, that can be a little rough. And that's just part of independent filmmaking, is that it's hard to it's hard to like connect all the dots to actually get the film done. And so there are going to be some things that suffer when you're trying to do it for a very low budget. But on a short film, either where you can have high production values because you were only filming for one weekend, or you have no production values, but it's just so bonkers. It's just a crazy little film, and you wouldn't want to watch it for 2 hours, but for 3 minutes, it's just a crazy little story. Like, I think that could be a really fun thing to expose yourself to. And so I really recommend seeking out local film festivals.
What have you been watching? What have you been watching? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you form opinions about the people who made it?
Let's move into what we've been watching. Andrew, what have you checked out this past week?
Recently, I watched this movie called Withnail and I. It is a 80s, looks like 87, kind of a dark comedy British movie. So the tone is a little different than what I was used to, and it basically follows two guys. One of them, his name is Withnail, which I was trying to figure like, what is this? Does this mean something? No, that's just his name. And then his friend, and they end up they're kind of like depressed a little bit. It's like winter in England, and it's very rainy and cloudy, and they drink a lot, they smoke a lot, they complain a lot. They end up going on vacation to the like on a farming area, and then shenanigans happen and some funny things happen, and it was just a very kind of unique movie with a tone that you don't really get too often, but I really enjoyed, yeah, like the uniqueness, the cleverness of it all, and just how it kind of played out with these two characters. Um, and it's almost like a comedy where you wouldn't realize it's a comedy until like a little further, and it's like, oh, this is supposed to be funny because it is exaggerated in a way. It kind of reminds me of like comedies in the '80s, like an American version might be like Better Off Ted or Heathers, where they're like a little quirky in a way. But this is very different because it's so British, and just British comedy feels very different to me. And I really enjoyed this. Have you seen this one?
I watched it many years ago, and I can't. I mean, I remember hearing it was great, and then I
Yeah.
think I watched it maybe not with the awareness to really appreciate it. I should really revisit it. I know Will Arnett lists it as his favorite movie of all time. It's a
Yes. That's what I saw, and I was like, well, I got to check this out if he loves it this much. But
Now.
yeah, I
Would you
feel
say
like
is it funny? Like, do
it
you
is
like?
funny. I feel like if you go in expecting something else, like you just have to accept what this is. And I think it took me a minute to like get into it and be like, oh, okay, this is just a certain type of movie, and to just kind of drop the expectations of what you think this should or shouldn't be. It's funny if you let it be funny, but if you're looking for like the laugh out loud, I feel like American style of humor, it's not there. It's much more subtle,
Okay,
but
great.
really great. I don't know. It might not be for everybody. I'm sure it's not, but I liked it.
Well, that's great. I mean, and that's kind of a great film to bring up, just because it's one people might not be thinking of, and I definitely want to check it out again, but probably kind of for the first time after many years. So,
Right.
great with Hill and I recently watched The Rip, which is on Netflix, which is the new Ben Affleck Matt Damon movie, and it's it's really fun. I think it's an action, sort of a crime action movie, and it's Ben Affleck and Matt Damon play police officers in Miami who are investigating. It's kind of like they're investigating drug cartels, but they're not going after the drugs; they're going after the illicit money. And so it's a little bit of an interesting twist on that, but it largely then is a contained story where they go to this house to do this raid. They find so much more money than they were expecting that they now realize. And I think this is just an interesting premise, because you think, like, you find so much money, well, isn't that just a positive? But they're like, wait a minute, we found so much more money than we expected to find, that this is the kind of amount of money that people are really going to come kill for. And that, like, even us as police officers are not safe with this amount of money. And we can't trust each other. We can't trust. It's so much money that it's it's something like they were expecting there to be $100,000 and there's $30 million. It's something like that, where it's just a crazy amount of money. And it's the kind of money where everybody's loyalty is going to be challenged because of just that sheer temptation of that. And so I think it's a really interesting, contained kind of drama. To me, it's most interesting when it is playing with that contained aspect. There are a couple big action sequences in it which are fun, and a lot of shoot 'em up kind of stuff. To me, that's less interesting about the movie, but I think you sort of have to deliver on. You see a bunch of cops with guns, you expect them to have a shootout at some point.
So is it like when you say it's contained, is it mostly like in one room or like in one building? Is that a lot
It's
of the movie?
mostly in one house. So it's like they go, there's some setup. They go to do this raid on a house, and then they decide we have to count the money before we can leave, because that's protocol and that would be the safe thing to do. But as long as we're in this house, we are vulnerable to people attacking us. And so it's
Right.
then kind of like a Western where this is the fort that they're now trying to defend.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that does sound kind of fun. And Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, who've been in a few movies together.
They were in The Last Duel. They were in a little movie called Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you've heard of it.
We might
But
have talked about them. Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, I would say they don't really lean into. It's not like you're seeing the Good Will Hunting relationship again. It's them playing very different roles and very different relationship with each other. But I think if you like them, both of them do well at what they're there to do. And Ben Affleck seems a little bit more macho, and Matt Damon a little bit more thoughtful, and it's kind of what you expect them to be.
Right.
And I would also recommend, if anyone's interested, they've been doing a lot of interviews about the film, and I think they are very smart guys who know a lot about how the film and TV industry work. And so the way that they structured this movie on the back end, so that they're trying to do this thing where if the movie's successful, not just the top people get paid bonuses, but also all the crew get bonuses.
Okay.
And so I don't know if I don't know all the details there, but it's an interesting to look at some of the press they've been doing for this film, just because of the insights it gives into how the Hollywood industry is working these days.
Yeah, they're two people who definitely know the industry pretty well. They've been doing this a long time. So
Yeah. And both, like, I feel like they're kind of rare in that they really are A-list people who still kind of look at the industry as outsiders. And I think, I mean, in many ways they're insiders, but I think they have a little bit of perspective that's, a willingness to examine things a little bit more critically than a lot of people who are just happy to be along for the ride.
Right, or at least they're able to explain it. I've seen some of their interviews, and they do explain it kind of in general terms to where somebody who doesn't know the industry can understand what's going on. So it does feel like they have an ability to communicate well of how this all works and why they're doing things.
Yeah, if one specific thing, this is not related to the Rip, but if you see the Hot Ones episode with Matt Damon, where where they do the interview, but they're eating very spicy chicken wings while they do the interview. Maybe we should introduce that here, but he does, while eating incredibly hot and spicy chicken wings, he does a very like clear description of how the Hollywood industry and how the pipeline for making films has changed compared to 20 years ago. And so it's I would recommend that specifically. All right, so The Rip, check it out on Netflix. Withnail and I, an older film. What service did you watch that on?
That was on Criterion Channel, if anybody has that.
And we'll be right back after this.
We've been asked to read some testimonials about Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream.
Oh, really? What are people saying?
Well, here's one from Margaret in Ohio. I ate Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream and then got promoted at work. Coincidence? I think not.
Wow. Here's another from Brad in Texas. Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream helped me parallel park for the first time. Now I believe anything is possible.
And Susan in Vermont. After trying Fat Boy Butterscotch, I can subtly understand what my dog is thinking. Turns out he loves watching Bachelor in Paradise.
And here's one from Mike in Florida. Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream gave me the confidence to call my ex-wife and tell her I'm doing just fine without her.
Way to go. And finally, from Jennifer in Oregon. I used to be lactose intolerant, but Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream convinced my digestive system to make an exception.
These testimonials are 100% real words spoken by us.
Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream. Are you ready to see what it can do for you?
And we are back.
All right, and now let's get into our film of the week, 12 Angry Men. Andrew, what can you tell us about 12 Angry Men?
12 Angry Men, 1957, directed by Sidney Lumet. The defense and the prosecution have rested, and the jury is filing into the jury room to decide if a young Spanish-American is guilty or innocent of murdering his father. What begins as an open and shut case soon becomes a mini-drama of each of the jurors' prejudices and preconceptions about the trial, the accused, and each other. And this is a very famous movie. It's high on a lot of lists. I think it's number 3 on Letterboxd right now. I know it's in a lot of top 100s. I feel like if you haven't seen this movie, you've probably heard of this movie. But it is, when they say 12 Angry Men, it's just basically the movie is about these 12 men in one room. Well, maybe 2 rooms. There's a bathroom that they go to for a minute, but it's really, really a contained movie about just the jurors discussing what happened. And I think what's really interesting about this is that you're not part of the jury in the fact of like hearing the defendant or hearing the accused. You don't hear any of the trial or testimony. It's all after the fact. And so this whole movie just takes place where they talk about what they heard and discuss if this guy is guilty, if he's not guilty. And it's just almost like, show don't tell. This is a lot of just telling what happened without you actually seeing anything, but it works really well, and it works surprisingly well. So it's kind of unique in that way. What were your first impressions of this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a film, as you say, it's so highly regarded, and I assumed that would be immediately, as I started watching it, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is amazing. And I feel like my first impressions were like, wait a minute, this is this is a lot of talking, but it's not necessarily that there's just so much talking, but rather that it's I feel like the scenario itself doesn't seem particularly realistic to me. Which, and we'll get into that, but I feel like my first thought was, this seems like it's an allegory, or it's like this is all supposed to be like a fable about teaching some kind of lesson. I just can't believe that this is how a jury actually works. And so I guess that was my first sort of thought watching it. And then as I was kept watching and thinking about that, I sort of challenged that a little bit. And I do think it in many ways is a fable and an allegory. And I think it's intentionally not letting us know that much about who these people are. But one of my initial sort of stumbling blocks watching the film was, I don't even like, these characters are just caricatures, or they're just, you have like a bold, this guy's a bigot. Yeah. This guy's like very thoughtful, but he holds to his opinions. This guy is, he's old and he wants to be heard. But like, it seemed like all the characters had a one-line description that was the entirety of their character. And I have some more thoughts about that, but that was kind of like something I struggled with when I first started watching it.
Yeah, because it is a lot to take in 12 people at once with basically no backstory. You don't see them in any other situation. You don't know what their outside lives are like other than what they are saying in this room to each other. And I think that part of it is, I think it's a tough challenge. I think if you're thinking of it from like the film director's perspective here, how are they going to introduce all these characters in a way to where the audience can make sense of like, oh, this is how they're all different? And I think they do a pretty good job of that up front. But as you mentioned, it's a lot of like, this is this guy's thing, and he's known for this one thing, but that's really all they have time to set up. But with a story that's kind of this direct and really not, I mean, in a way, it's about these people, but it's more of how this evolves as a group. I feel like the group is really what the issue is here. And like the character is the group of people as one person. Um, so those elements of like this is a guy who's known for one thing, I think it kind of works because of how it's all together. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's intentionally not telling us the backstory of these characters really, and I think it is intentional because I think the point of this is much more allegorical. I would say though, like the one striking thing just watching this in 2026 is that all of the characters are white men. All of
Yep.
the jurors are white men. One of them is an immigrant, I assume from Europe.
Italy, maybe. I couldn't figure out which country specifically, but
And they don't clarify, and which I think is probably intentional too. But maybe an Italian immigrant. But all of them are white men. So I think on the one hand, that's interesting. Like you just wouldn't see that today, I feel like, and so that's
yeah,
just a difference. It also means that to one extent that's to the detriment of the film. I think at least from our 2026 eyes that it's limiting the perspectives to just like what those people would have and not looking at a broader range of how people would react to this case. I also think though that it is all the more reason why they needed to give very quick like definitions of who each character was, because there's no clear
Mm,
visual cues that you
yep,
might have otherwise. This is an Asian woman. This is an African American man. This is a young Hispanic teenager, or probably 18-year-old, whatever. Like you have to be a certain age to be a juror, but like
right.
you don't have any of those sort of like clear markers of differentiation, and so you then have to get into the like just on the character level what's differentiating the different people.
Yeah, I wondered how intentional that was as I was watching, because it's like, did they intentionally not involve women in this movie? Is it all white men on purpose? Are they trying to make a point with this? Or was this just of the times? This was the 50s. I don't know if they thought, we're just going to get a bunch of white men for this movie because that's what we want to do. But it does make a difference in how you watch this movie, especially from today's perspective. Because I don't know, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering like, if a woman was in here, this would be very different. If you had different types of people that weren't just all these one specific type of man, it'd be a very different movie, even though they have different characteristics. But so I thought that was an interesting choice. And I don't know why specifically they did that. I don't know the backstory, but it does change things.
I think just from a quick look into the history, it seems like women could serve on juries at that time, but that maybe there were limitations put on that, and that depends on which state you were in, and that it was much more common for it to be men. But I haven't seen that it was like, of course, in the 1957 all juries were always all men. I don't think that that's true, but maybe this was not unusual at the time though for it to
Yeah.
be men.
What I think it
Um,
does add to the fact that it's about a young immigrant. I think they said Puerto Rican kid who I think they would have considered an immigrant, somebody of a lower class social status at that time. So I think that dynamic does work well in the way they tell the story. So there's something from that.
yeah, and I think there is something to. I mean, it was striking to me just how much I noticed. I don't necessarily like spend a lot of time, you know, calling out for more representation of different different groups all the time. That's not necessarily the where I put all of my attention, but I was so struck by it's just white men, and it's like it's interesting that and I guess I was thinking like it isn't interesting though that I think a lot of times now you would just use the shorthand of whatever racial characterization or age or gender. I mean, age is in this, but gender and racial characterization of the characters, if you were making the movie now, as just sort of a shorthand to explain who they are or to play off of that idea. And I think that there is an interesting challenge that this movie takes on, whether they were intentionally doing it or not, or maybe that was just the time they were in, but of trying to define these characters and not falling back on just a quick shorthand for what this person is. And I think in general, I didn't find this movie to be the most enjoyable movie or the most rip-roaring good time, but I do think I think it's a great film to study because I think it does a really good job of people make arguments and you follow the logic of those arguments and you see people battling with each other. It's not just that one person makes an argument and everybody agrees with them. It's going back and forth, and the side making one argument is making good points. The side making the other argument is making good points. And I think that kind of discussion is really, really valuable when you're writing, regardless of what kind of genre or story you're talking about. And so I think studying this movie and seeing how it plays out that way, even if you're not interested in writing something about a courtroom case, I think that's really valuable here.
It's kind of inherent. There's these inherent like strengths and weaknesses to this type of a story, because, it's so contained, and that when you have an introduction of 12 people and then they start, giving their explanations, giving their arguments, almost how are they going to reveal the information and when are they going to reveal it and when are they going to talk about this specific evidence and discuss it, and just the way that it's laid out for you. I think the way the filmmakers do that, the screenwriter, the director, the way that they lay it out is very well done, because it does seem like this could have been a very boring movie, or this could have been, 20 minutes if you wanted to cut everything down. Maybe, there's only so much they can talk about. And really when it comes down to, there's these like 4 or 5 main points that they talk about. But then every time you think somebody has an upper hand, the Henry Fonda character comes back with something. And, like when he puts the knife on the table and you're like, oh, wow, I see where this is going. Or in the whole, I'm going to kill you phrase comes up. And then the guy says, is like, is that what you mean? Like there's these really strong, like dramatic moments that they pull out of this. That's just kind of amazing. When you think about it, it's like, how did they get something so dramatic out of such little to work with? Like it really feels like they're drawing everything they can out of this story. And that's pretty impressive on its own.
Yeah. And I think I think this is such a masterclass in the contained story. And that's something we talk about in terms of, especially if you're thinking of doing something on a low budget, but how do you tell this story in a contained location? And I think this it's all dialogue. It's these characters coming in with their they're just talking basically. There's a few small actions, but it's in one room with dialogue, and yet it is a battle and it is heated. And I think it's such a good exploration of that. And I think there's another aspect of this that's really interesting. That is the Henry Fonda character. I guess he's the main character. He's the one who stands out.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not a normal main character. And this is why I think the movie's really worth studying in many ways. It's sort of unusual in this sense, and I think a little bit, it's weird to not have a clear main character. And so I think that's maybe not the best thing to model the average script on, but it's really interesting here because he's the one who stands out from the crowd, who makes his argument, and who ends up convincing everybody else. But we know nothing about him, and we don't know why he cares so much. And I think that in general, that would be a weakness of a film, because you would want to say, why what is the journey that this main character is on? Why does it matter so much to them what they are achieving here? And I think what this movie is intentionally doing is not saying that, because it's trying to make the bigger argument. We should all accept that a presumption of innocence is essential. We should all understand that you don't just condemn somebody because you think they're probably guilty. It's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is something that, if we tied it just to Henry Fonda thinks this is important because of something in his backstory, that would sort of limit the message. But I think it's intentionally saying it has nothing really to do with Henry Fonda. It has to do with, this is a principle that we should all be able to agree with.
That's a really good point. It's almost like he's the average man, or like the model citizen, the model American citizen, in a way of like, this is what you should be. And then everybody else, of the 12 men, they all have a backstory to some degree that we learn about. Yeah, at least a little bit. You've got the guy who grew up in the slums. You've got a few racist guys. You've got a guy who's got an issue with his son, the immigrant guy. Like there's the advertising guy. They all have something. And the Henry Fonda character, he just never gives anything. He doesn't give any personal information. You don't learn anything until like the very end. He exchanges names and he's like, well, see you later. So I think there is something to that, to where this, as you said, it's like an allegory in a way that it's meant to show, or as a type of like, this is the model of who we should follow. And he's the guy that's the good guy in this, even though at the end of the movie, we don't know who is innocent or guilty. We don't know how everything turns out with the kid that was put on trial. You don't know if he actually was right or wrong. And I think that's besides the point the movie's trying to make. The movie's saying, if you have a doubt, you can't convict somebody with that. That's just the system that we've set up. And so it's more about that system than it is about the actual events of the story or that they talk about.
Yeah, I think that is such an interesting challenge that the movie takes on, because it's not, we even as viewers want a conclusive answer. And we want there to be, and it's so many like courtroom dramas and Matlock and Law and Order, whatever. It's like, if the person's found not guilty, it's because it usually is because we figured out who is guilty. And that's sort of the point. But that's not actually how the legal system works, and certainly not how the legal system is supposed to work. And in this film, it really is, it's about, like, there doesn't need to be another explanation for who did the murder. It's just that there is not sufficient evidence to convict this guy. And that's, I think, this film is apparently shown in a lot of law schools and talked about in law schools, not because it's super realistic in exactly how the jury would do things or in exactly how they would talk about things, but because of these kind of principles of the difference between some thinking that somebody's probably guilty and that being guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that distinction is an important one. And there's also apparently like a big part of why people talk about this in a legal setting is you have all of these different pieces of evidence, but if there are problems with those individual pieces of evidence and your whole case is built on not one single damning piece of evidence, but this whole collection of evidence, as each one of those pieces starts to be less and less reputable or reliable, then the whole case starts to fall apart. And I think it's an interesting part of this. I didn't go to law school by choice, but I understand that is something that people do take seriously in looking at this film.
Yeah. The first time I watched this film was in a psychology class in college, actually. And they're talking about, how groups work and the way the group dynamics are. And there's a lot of psychological concepts you can get from this movie, which is also interesting. But I think it's the fact that, you can take real life examples from this. And like, there is a lot of this that you just learn something from. How people work and how to set up a case, or legally, psychologically, there's a lot to this that hits home on being realistic while also at the same time being something that isn't believable, or you're like, I just don't know that this is how it would actually work, but it still teaches you something. So I think it does fall in that category of kind of like a fairy tale or a story of some kind. There's a moral to it. And I think that's really hard to pull off in an entertaining way, especially with the confinements they have. But it is surprising that it works really well to tell this particular story. I'm thinking of the scene when the racist guy does his little rant, and then everybody gets up and they kind of stand with their backs to him, and it's like this really, it's very dramatic. I feel like it's a big high point in this movie where the tides are turning, and just that, like, just the way that the people are set up in there, the blocking of it all from a director's perspective, that you can get so much out of it. I just it's really amazing that they are able to do this while the story itself I didn't find that interesting as a story,
Mhm.
but just being amazed by the technical aspects of everything else that comes with it. So I don't know, it's a back and forth on this.
Yeah, it's I mean, I feel like this is a great film to watch in a sort of school setting because it's I mean, it is dynamic, and I think if is it the most fun thing to sit down and watch? I don't think so, but I think it it has stakes, it has emotion, and it is going through really interesting ideas. I also think there's an aspect of this where it's a good demonstration of how to shoot a contained film
Mhm.
because it's not just like we're going to be in a room and we're just going to have very boring camera shots that are just sort of documenting this like it was a play. If you've ever watched like a play shot on film, it's
Boring.
just so boring. I find it like almost impossible to watch because it's just like this is the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
But here they do some really interesting, you know, sort of subtle, but I think some interesting camera shots, like shot choices and cutting that keeps it. It's not like it's a showy, fast-paced edit, but I think it keeps it dynamic visually enough, which is important when you're in such a contained space.
Mhm. And they do give you a little bit of breaks every now and then. Like, they have the part where they argue and then they go to a bathroom. Everybody's got to the bathroom, and they have like a little real scene that's a break from where you were just at. Or they have this scene where it starts raining, and that's kind of a break and also kind of a sign that things are changing. And just the way that they're shooting from different angles at the very end, he's shooting it from inside the closet as people are leaving the room. And there is a lot of work that goes into how this was presented visually, that I think you could look at and say this is really well done, and technically really well done, because it could have been so boring. I think
Mhm.
this film had all the potential to really fail and not live up to anything, and yet it succeeds despite all of the roadblocks that it has in front of it. And that's really worth noting and worth watching, even if it's just for that reason. Because I think inherently the story doesn't lend itself to something that's going to be really exciting for a lot of people. But if you were to say, what would you do better? How could you make this a better movie? I don't know. I don't know what you could change or what you could argue and say, if he would have done this, this would have made the film better. I don't know what I would have said to that.
No, and I want to discuss in a minute uh, other similar movies. Get your take on those, but first I wanted to ask you, any evidence, was there any evidence that they're discussing that like stood out as like, wait a minute, or like any sort of thoughts on their discussion of the actual specifics that stood out to you?
There's a lot of the discussion that I would have loved to have heard the attorneys, the lawyers talk about, and to see what they actually said, because the way that they recall this information, I think they can make it seem for the story how they want it to come across. So I don't know. Was there something specific that stood out to you though?
There was something specific. Well, I mean, they bring up the old man, the woman looking, with her glasses and the
Glasses,
little marks on her nose, and does she have
right?
them? And fair enough. The one thing that stood out to me though was the knife. First of all, the idea that the guy has gone out and bought a similar knife, I think, is like wildly inappropriate. I don't think you're allowed to do that as a juror.
Well, they said it
But
was illegal or something. I don't know why. They said like
I
having a switch knife is illegal or something at the
I
time.
think switchblades are often illegal in different
Okay,
places, because there's. I think that it's an easy thing to make illegal because there's no useful use for it.
right.
Like
But they
there,
needed that visual. That's the only visual they had,
yeah.
really.
But the thing that stood out to me with that was, and this doesn't undermine the bigger point of the movie by any means, but they make the argument that like, okay, no, if you knew what you were doing with a switchblade, you wouldn't stab somebody like this. You'd stab them like that. Like you
Mhm.
wouldn't come down at them. You'd come up because you'd be holding it like this. And I just thought, but he was stabbed with that knife from
Yeah.
above. So like
Somebody did use that knife for that purpose.
somebody did that. So like your argument that nobody would do that doesn't make any sense because somebody did that. So like the idea that if you're arguing that like that kid uniquely wouldn't do that, that's one thing. But if your argument is nobody would do that, that
Right.
doesn't really work if we know that's what happened.
Yeah, were they saying the kid would have known how to use a switchblade, which I guess is something maybe they're arguing. He's from the slums, as they say. So they're suggesting the killer isn't from the slums or isn't familiar with the switchblade, which why would he have it? I don't know. They're not trying to solve the case, I guess, is the thing.
They're not trying to solve the case. I guess it's just throwing some doubt on it. So I guess there's that. And so it totally works. But that was one little not that would be like a refuting the logic, but I feel like one of the other characters could have brought that up. That like
Right.
we know that he did get stabbed that way, so like that's not the best argument. But
Maybe that was in the original script and they decided to cut it. It's like we just need to get past this. Let's
we need
just
to- yeah.
let's just move on.
But so thinking about like other jury or courtroom movies, I show in film classes sometimes the scene in A Few Good Men where Tom Cruise is questioning Jack Nicholson on the stand, and the
Mhm.
students mostly have not seen the film, but they're all familiar with the "you can't handle the truth" line, so they get a kick out of watching the scene because it's like, oh, that's where that's from. But I think that's another great example of like the sort of battling. I think courtrooms sometimes lend themselves to battling back and forth between characters, and
Right.
and I think really it's not just one-sided. One person is making a speech, which sometimes courtroom dramas can do, but in A Few Good Men, it's like Tom Cruise is really making his point, and Jack Nicholson is coming back at him with his own points of like,
Good
oh,
point.
here's why you're wrong. And
Right.
it's that battle between them, which I think is what you see in 12 Angry Men too, that's really, really good writing. Any other sort of similar movies that stood out to you that come to mind thinking of a comparison here?
I was drawn to one of my favorite movies, The Social Network, where it's like a movie that has at its core it's about a deposition, and it's just the argument of what happened. But in this movie, you see what happened, so it's a big difference because most of the movie is actually seeing the past. But I do like how in Social Network they have the writing is I think it's another Sorkin anyway who
Yeah.
didn't he do yeah. So
A
he's
Few Good
very
Men and Social Network.
yeah. But the fact that you can have these really intense moments take place in a room of people just sitting around on chairs, and this back and forth, and like so much of the intense, like dramatic moments happen in that room, even though there's so much other stuff going on. That was a movie that I don't know, I thought of, even though they're not directly comparable, that's very much not a contained movie, but just the idea of in a room, you can have these really dramatic things happen around a table with people just talking about things that have happened. And
Yeah.
that's hard to pull off, but well done when it happens.
Absolutely. Two other movies that came to mind. There's a movie called Runaway Jury with
Yeah.
John Cusack and Rachel Weisz and some other people. But it's interesting because it's basically taking 12 Angry Men premise. Oh, Gene Hackman's in it. But
Yeah.
it's basically saying like, what if you could introduce the Henry Fonda to the room? So like the no matter what the jury is going to decide normally, we can get one person who will sway them. And then
Right.
it's not about then what's true justice and what's the American legal system, what's the right way to do it. It's about we know that in convincing a group of people, one person can do that. And so we are going to like
Find that
our
person.
service for you is that we can find that one person who will sway the whole jury.
To use the system kind of against itself, to exploit it in a way.
Yeah.
Which is it's like the opposite message of 12 Angry Men.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like what if Henry Fonda had just been bought out by somebody, and
He was,
it's like the family of that young man on trial paid Henry Fonda to go into that room as a juror.
and that could be how the movie ends. He walks out of the courtroom and then he walks into a car. A guy hands him a bag of cash.
Yeah.
He's like, "Good job."
The other movie that came to mind was a movie called Juror Number 2, which came out just like a year or two ago, directed by Clint Eastwood. And it's about a guy who serves on a jury who, over the course of the trial, so it's a woman is on trial for murder. Over the course of the trial, he realizes that he actually killed the person who
What? I haven't seen this one.
it's I mean, it makes more sense. It makes more sense within the context of the movie, because it's like the woman's being accused of like killing her ex-husband or something, and he actually was driving drunk in a rainstorm, hit something that turns out to have been that person, or maybe turns out to have been that person, but he didn't recognize in the moment what he had hit and just kept driving. And so only after the fact, when he's actually on the jury for that murder trial, does he realize that it probably was him. Anyway, so it's an interesting movie. I think it's a really interesting counterpoint to 12 Angry Men, because it's the way that the jury deals with the case is in one way so much more far-fetched, just because of this scenario of somebody on the jury actually committed the crime. It's just this like really high concept kind of crazy idea. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit more realistic in the way that the jury's actually dealing with things, because a big part of that movie is most of the jurors don't really care. And they're there because they're required to be there. And they're just sort of like going to make the best decision they can, but also they want to get done with it. And they don't really have that strong an opinion. And I think that is a lot more the experience with a lot of people. But in 12 Angry Men, everybody is so impassioned. And I think that's an interesting part of it, that everybody really, really cares about the discussion. And that's I think that's a strength of the movie, but also I'm not sure if that's realistic.
Yeah, I think they sacrificed some realism in order to make the movie interesting. Because without everybody having an opinion, that movie I think it would drag a lot more. I think it'd be a lot tougher watch. So I'm glad they did it this way. Give everybody something exciting to say.
Well, and that is a good writing tip too, is that give your characters strong opinions. It's like it just is a lot heavier lifting if you've got a character that's like whatever. Like that works in some contexts, but it's easier to write a compelling scene if your characters all have strong opinions about what's going on.
You don't want to watch a movie about somebody who doesn't care about what's happening, because then there's no story to it. There's nothing to do. Yeah.
Yep. Now, have you ever served on a jury?
I have not, surprisingly. I've never.
Neither
done
have
it.
I've never. I think when I was in college, I got a jury summons, but I was living out of state, and different states act differently, but they just let me out of it. I know some people have had to go home from college when they got called for jury.
Oh wow.
But no, I've never served on a jury. My wife served on a jury, and it was an interesting case. They did take it pretty seriously. I'm not sure that they had like impassioned, super strong arguments about it, but people did take their responsibility as a jury seriously, and people and it was a range of different reactions. Most people, I think that most people are just kind of like, yeah, I think the defense made the stronger case, so I guess I'm going to vote that way.
Right.
But I think she mentioned one or two people were like, I just cannot send that man to prison. Like no matter what, I just would feel too guilty as a person if I was responsible for sending him to prison.
Yeah.
And I remember in that case, my wife mentioned it was something about, I think it was like he was a felon and he was accused of being caught by the police with an illegal gun or something. But I think part of the argument was that the defense made was there were so many illegal guns on the ground near where the situation happened that it's impossible to say it was his illegal gun. Like that's quite the neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's a matter of I don't really care, if they prove he did it or not. I just don't want the punishment to go to this guy, and so that's a different thing. I think you could do the same thing with if you did the O.J. Simpson trial. That's a totally different dynamic of are they really talking about what does the evidence say, or is there something else going on behind the scenes? There's a lot of different ways these jury situations can play out. And it's interesting that 12 Angry Men plays it out in, I would say, the ideal way, probably, without getting other things in the way. But a lot of the times it would be different for different situations.
Well, and I think that is something that 12 Angry Men is really trying to do. It's not trying to make it super specific. They have to discuss the evidence and whatnot, and so that gets a little specific, but it's really, I think, trying to be a lesson for how we should look at justice and look at for like the presumption of innocence. And so it's not trying to, like, I think juror number 2 has a cool gimmick. And I think that would totally undermine the point of 12 Angry Men if there was a cool gimmick to it. Because the whole point is that this is supposed to be an examination of how the jury system is supposed to work.
Right. It almost feels like it's, if you were to go to school to learn about how America should work, that this would be one of the movies that just as an American citizen, you should watch just to know this is what our country is based on. This is the legal system and how it should operate. And I don't know, there's something to that. I think that's and I think that resonates with a lot of people that feel very strongly, and it connects to them. And I mean, a lot of people have this movie as like one of the best things they've ever seen. And I can't argue against that, but I think it resonates with different people in different ways, especially probably if you have a sense of this doing right in your community and your country and representing what the right moral and ideal situation should be. That may be more of a movie that's in your lane if that's the type of stuff that you like.
Would you recommend this as a film for people to watch? I mean, I guess my recommendation would be, I think teachers should show this to students. I think everyone should see this film, but A, I don't think it's going to be the most fun watch. And B, I think if you sit down and approach it like a normal movie, like if you're watching Vertigo and Mirror, you're already not just watching the latest Marvel movie alone. But like, I think if you're taking this seriously, the point of it isn't necessarily to enjoy it for the ride that you're going on. I think it is supposed to be a contemplation and an examination of how America is supposed to work. And so I think actually seeing it in a context where you can discuss it and talk about it with people is probably better than just watching it on your own.
Right. It's an interesting dynamic because I wouldn't put this in my top 100 movies, but would I recommend it to people? Yes, I would. I think it's a good thing to watch if you are into film at all and how to make movies. I think it's also a good thing to watch if you are just a citizen of a country in a democracy. That's also a good thing to watch this play out. And just to see a movie that is different than so many other movies and that makes you think and contemplate things. So it's kind of a strange dynamic of the two, like not my favorite, but also would recommend. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think would be a great doubleheader is watch 12 Angry Men, study it, and then watch the TV show Jury Duty, which, have you seen that?
Yes. Great show.
Great show. I mean, it's just so funny. It's sort of I mean, it's like the Truman Show where it's like a reality show, except only one person is living in reality and everyone else is an actor around him pretending to be in jury duty. And
such a great premise too. It's funny.
So funny.
How would you remake it if you had to? If the studios backed the truck up and paid you, what would you do?
If the studio came to us and said, "We love what you do. We want to remake 12 Angry Men. We need it to be a family movie." How would you approach that?
I think it is, subject wise, family friendly. I don't think a kid would have any issue with this. I think the family friendly aspect you would need to adjust would be making this entertaining for kids. And I think that's a tough ask for this specific story because of how contained it is. So I think if you were to make this a family movie, you would need to open it up a bit, and I think you'd give some backstory. I think the kid that's on trial, give him like a sympathetic story, an upbringing of some way that kids can relate to, and you'd have to make him innocent so that there is like a reward at the end of like we helped this innocent kid get off the get away from being put to death when he shouldn't have. But I would go along that route of leaning into who this kid is and make it a little more relatable and fun, specifically for children. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like children shouldn't be encouraged to murder their parents. So I have some qualms with that, but my greatest fear is one of my children murdering me. I think it's unlikely, but that is one of my greatest fears in life. I feel like that'd be bad for me and it would ruin their life. So
Double
that's
whammy.
that and snakes, those are my fears. But a different approach I thought of was take it to school, put it in a school setting. And I thought of like, what if you had, so you make it a little less serious, the crime.
Mhm.
But you take it to a school setting. And I thought like sometimes, I mean, I know this happens in colleges. I don't know if it happens at lower level schools, but maybe you could fudge it a little bit. But sometimes they'll have like a disciplinary board where there could be like a student representative on the disciplinary board. Like
Mhm.
it's like the principal, it's like the school counselor, it's like several adults, and then there's some kind of like student representative on the disciplinary board. And then that student plays the Henry Fonda role. And it's kind of like in this discussion of some action has happened at the school. Somebody did something, and this student is like in the context of this kind of like contained story discussion of what happened is making the case for why we shouldn't find them guilty of this infraction or whatever. And I don't know the specifics of what you would do, but I think kids would love that if like you had the student, like the kid sort of like
Yeah.
besting and convincing the adults. I think it's also not like an absurd premise. Like I think that kind of thing could theoretically happen. And there'd be a lot of questions about, oh, do you just not like this person or are you trying to do this? But like I think there could be questions about that. But I think you could have sort of like an exploration of like a similar kind of like argument back and forth to as we solve this case or as we solve this within a reasonable doubt where it's in that kind of school disciplinary setting.
Yeah, this could definitely work in a school setting with something not as serious, and then it kind of help the kid get away. He didn't actually do it at the end and all that. I think that would work pretty well.
I think that'd be a cool thing to do. Anyway, okay, but now the studio says we want to do it for no budget. Can you contain this all to one room? This is a tough one for this film because I feel like it's the essence. No bathroom trips. That's the only way. It's just one room.
Yeah.
But what would you
You do.
approach this, or would it make sense to do high budget for this? How would you explore this in those terms?
Right. So for this movie, I don't know how you make it much more low of a budget, unless you change it to Six Angry Men or something. I don't know, but it's already so contained. I don't know how you could contain this anymore. If you had a bigger budget though, and you wanted to make this something, that was you had a lot more money at your disposal, could you make this better by expanding on it in a way? I don't know. I think you could do some backstory on these people, or you could have. I think it'd be interesting to start this a little sooner to maybe see them sit in the room for like the first act of the movie where they're getting all of it, and they like you see them get tired from sitting there for a week of I don't know how long. I think it was like 6 days or something, where just every day kind of draws on, see people like nod off, fall asleep, to give like a little backstory of just this is a long case that's been dragging out, and then to give maybe a little bit of their home lives for some of these people could be interesting as they go home at night and come back. You might be able to add a little bit more to that. I don't know. That adds a lot of length to this movie. I don't know if it would make it more interesting or not, but you could potentially do that and pitch it for a bigger budget.
Yeah, so I mean, make it more like a conventional, like not like giant budget movie, but a conventional, like actually seeing things instead of just being in the room talking about them.
Yeah. I mean, you could potentially even show the actual murder from the different people's perspectives, from the woman in bed, from the guy who saw it on the train. I don't know. That could be interesting to see from an audience perspective and have the jury figure out, oh, she didn't have her glasses on, or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. I think that could be interesting. You could also play sort of like Rashomon-style. What if
Right.
we see different, as one person is explaining their take on what happened, we see it one way. We then see the scene play out differently from someone else's perspective. I don't know, that could be interesting.
That's a good idea. I actually like that one a lot because Rashomon works really well doing that, and this has the potential for that type of a story to be filmed that
Yeah.
way.
The thought I had was to blow up the budget a little bit. There's a an episode of the TV show Succession that kind of deals with this, but there was this big event. I think I want to say it's in Saudi Arabia, where like a whole bunch of super wealthy people were kind of imprisoned in like a very expensive hotel for like a week or something, while like they were forced to like sign over, either like sign oaths of loyalty or like sign over certain properties. And it was basically like this. I mean, this is a real thing that happened, so I don't want to misrepresent it. So I'm just sort of touching on my very vague sense of what happened. But basically, very wealthy, powerful people imprisoned at gunpoint in a very fancy, wealthy kind of location. That's an interesting setting to me. That conflict between, we are very powerful, everything here, we're still getting room service, we're pretending that we're all just living in this nice, or staying in this very nice hotel, but there are men with guns that are keeping us from leaving, and there are they're demanding certain things from us. And I think if you then have like, I don't think this is reflective of, I don't even know exactly what happened in that situation, but I think if you had a discussion of what do we do if, this is the setting in which we're in, but now we have to decide, do we go along with, signing this loyalty oath, or do we go along with, giving up these rights or whatever? I think that could be an interesting thing to see. You basically, in terms of being a remake of 12 Angry Men, you would have a discussion between these characters of what way should we go and why should we do it. So not like guilt or innocence, but that same kind of like strong-willed, contained argument about which side we should choose. But I think that juxtaposition of imprisonment with super luxury is an interesting thing to explore.
Mm-hmm. That could be. There's a lot of potential that could work out with this, keeping the premise of it. Yeah.
Keeping the sort of vague premise of it.
Yeah.
All right, what about a TV show? How would you approach this for like a 10-part Netflix series, for a longer ongoing show? How would you approach that?
I don't know if this would work, but I had this idea that you would do each, like the first 6 episodes or so, you do 2 characters' backstories, like per episode, where each juror has their own backstory, where they're at home, you get some backstory of their life, because they all have, this thing that defines them. And you kind of set up this character, and then it kind of ends when they show up at the courtroom, and then you do the next character. I don't know if this would work, to do that many characters, 6 episodes of just getting all these characters' backstories. You might have to add a little bit of the discussion in the juror room to this to make it interesting. But there could be something there to where you kind of work it through, and then by the end, you're getting to, you have all this backstory, you have the history. Maybe you even do an episode on the kid, and just to give it a little more life. And then you also have intercut with this a little bit, maybe every episode, of the jury like discussing it in the room. I think there's something to that might be a little hard to pull off, but that's where my mind went for like a TV series for this.
Yeah, I think that would work. My idea was a little different, sort of leaving behind some of the basics of 12 Angry Men, but I don't think there's been a TV show about a grand jury. My brother served on a grand jury, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a grand jury doesn't decide guilt or innocence. They decide to indict or not indict. So if you're called to a grand jury, you hear a lot of different cases. You might be on that grand jury it's not like full time until it's done. It's like I'm not exactly sure exactly the time commitment, but you could be on the grand jury for weeks, hearing dozens of cases, and
Mm,
it's usually only the prosecution making their case, and it's you as a jury deciding, have they made a strong enough case for probable cause that I believe that's the right term, but that
yeah.
there's enough reason to indict this person. We don't need to decide beyond a reasonable doubt. We just need to decide that it's, that there's reason. A lot of these legal terms have
There's
specific
a
meanings, so I don't want
probability
to
to it.
misstate it, but it's
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's a lower bar.
Hmm.
But so that would then open up, like, if you have the same jury of people, but they're now hearing different cases. So every week or every episode, they could be hearing a different case. It's the same jurors who could be discussing and deliberating with each other, but each week it's going to be a little bit like a case of the week where they have to decide for that week, what's the outcome going to be. I'm not sure that that would be great, but it is kind of I'm not sure that we've seen that format exactly, even though it kind of lends itself to like the sort of like procedural weekly kind of show.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought because you'd have, a cast for a season and then, they're done after that. And you get a new cast potentially for next season with all new cases. I think
Hmm.
that could be fun. There's potential to that idea. I've never seen it though. Yeah.
I mean, I think one problem is that, like, the stakes are just lower. I mean, it would be bad. I've never been indicted for anything, knock on
Yeah.
wood. I think that would feel pretty bad, but it is a little bit like the stakes are a little lower to be indicted as opposed to being sent to the electric chair. So
Yeah. I wonder
it's,
if it would have to be more focused on the actual jurors themselves and the drama between them as much as the actual cases themselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, but it's an idea. So would any of these be better than 12 Angry Men?
I think there's potential that some of these are more entertaining, that you could do a lot more with it. But as for the contained story of 12 Angry Men, that actual story, I don't know that you can do it better than the way they did it in the movie. That's just the best way to produce that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I would say it too. Is that I think the kids movie. I think your idea of sort of like just actually visually seeing things more. I think those could be more fun to watch, but in many ways that would be undermining or just different from like what is so uniquely powerful about 12 Angry Men.
It's not that. My other pitch for a change in the movie, if it was 12 Angry Women, there's potential for that as well. That could be fun. Just 12 women, all jurors. And
Not
see,
not jurors, they're just angry.
they're just angry. Yeah. 12 angry men, not jurors at all. But yeah, you make them jurors. I don't know. I think that could be, if somebody had like if you had a woman director, woman writer, write it 12 angry women. I don't know. I think that could be interesting. Like just how it would be different than the 12 angry men version. I don't
Yeah.
know. I wouldn't write it, but somebody could potentially do that and it'd be a little different.
It would also be interesting to see 12 Angry Men, but just have nothing to do with the courtroom. It's just, they're just angry. I mean, they're just going around burning stuff. That's what the movie's about. It's like you think it's a remake of 12 Angry Men, and it's really just about
It's
men causing damage.
it's a club for 12 men that get together and they just meet once a week and they are angry. They talk about what they're angry about and they go out and do something about it. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea for if people search for your film, they search for 12 Angry Men, they accidentally click on yours. Now they're watching your fun movie.
They're like, oh, I thought this was black and white. Okay. Which one's Henry Fonda? Yeah.
He's the guy lighting that thing on fire.
Yeah.
How to make films and influence people.
And there we have it. Thank you for joining us at How to Make Films and Influence People. Check us out on our next episode and check us out at howtomakefilmspodcast.com. And we'll see you next time.